Welcome, everyone. We'll get started in about a minute. Thank you for joining us. We'll get started very shortly. We're just waiting for a few more folks. So welcome to Gray Associates 2022 Community College Bootcamp Series, and thank you for joining us. We are discussing academic program evaluation for community colleges. Today is our fourth and final class in the series, and we're focusing on management and implementation. We're pleased to have with us Andrew Dorsey, President Emeritus, Front Range Community College, and Mary Upchurch, a partner at Gray. Allow me to share a few housekeeping items if you don't mind. If you have any questions, please place them in the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen. We will try to get to as many of them as possible, and we can follow up with you offline if we do run out of time. You can also use the chat area for comments and discussion. We will have a pop-up poll or two. Please do participate and give us your feedback. It's very valuable to us. And without further ado, I will hand things off to Mary.
Hi, good morning and good afternoon, depending upon which time zone you're in. We are thrilled that you have joined us today for what we hope is actually not just a presentation, but a discussion. So before we start, I'd like to ask a quick question for something that you would like to consider as we're talking through the material today. And just check it out for yourselves. How frequently at your institution do you evaluate your programs? If you give us just one sense, if you have a moment and pick one, it would be helpful for us too as we're walking through this discussion.
We are getting a lot of participation, Mary. I'm just waiting for one more moment just to make sure everyone's had a chance.
Okay, I think that's great. So we've got a significant percentage really in comparison to what we normally experience with institutions doing ongoing evaluations, and then once a year and every 3 years. Only a few only as needed for accreditation. So perfect. Let's see. Do I need to take that poll down, Marianne, or do you?
We are down, maybe just X out of it for on your end.
All right, perfect. All right. So let's talk about program evaluation and actually what actually is a program evaluation system. At Gray, we see it as an integrated perspective within an institution. It involves 4 major areas of consideration, starting with institutional mission, focus, and the strategic plan for the institution. And then the academic elements related to that, the standards for your programs, the standards that originate from the institutional accreditor, as well as any individual programs that may have their own accreditation or licensure requirements. Then there's something called margins that we call margins. This isn't budgets, but instead this is program economics. And if any of you tuned in to one of our prior sessions that we had, you know that this is really taking a look at instructional costs and revenues that are coming in. The goal here is not for every program to be in a for-profit position by any means, because it's not about profit. But ideally, if you have programs that can produce positive margin, that can help support other programs that are critical to mission within the institution. So you have balance and also the ability to fund for new and invest. And then finally, markets. Of the 4 of these, this is the one that's outside of the 4 walls. We also had a session on markets for consideration. This is now what's going on inside. What are students interested in, and what are they interested in enrolling in? What are the competitors, and who are they in the market? And what modality are they actively offering programs with? And then finally, what are the outcome potentials in relationship to employment, and how you would want to consider that in the context of the health of your programs? These 4 areas combined give you a sense of the perspective health and vitality of your program portfolio. In and of themselves, they're very important to understand, but they can't exist effectively without a process that engages all the critical stakeholders in the institution. So the people aspect of this is everything from administration, academics, operations, and it can be for support services like students, student services, and admissions, as well as others. And then the process piece, and that's actually something that we started with. How often do you take a look at your portfolio? What's the frequency? And do you have a disciplined way that you evaluate it? That's partly what we're going to be speaking to, both the dynamics of what that might look like and also the challenges that arise, because everyone is approaching this with the best of intentions. We're talking about the heart of your institution, but as a result, it also produces a lot of different points of view. So why do you even do it? Well, this is why. You want to sustain and grow a very vibrant institution. And to do that, you need programs that are going to attract and retain your students, provide them with excellent outcomes as they enter into their field of choice or the continuation of studies. And because you're an ongoing institution, you want to make sure you remain contemporary with the needs of your communities and your students and the people who are benefiting from it. So with that, what does it actually take? When we talk about it, it's really about management, leadership, and institutional engagement. From our perspective, we think establishing a best practices process for program evaluation really supports critical institutional goals. It is the means under which strategic vision is achieved and delivered. And it involves several different things in order to do it successfully. First and foremost, it's about engaging the institution, your stakeholders, your users, your advocates that support the programs, use them, and care about you. And then it's about respecting processes, governance, as well as decision-making. We believe very strongly in data-informed decision-making, not data-driven decision-making, because institutional knowledge and awareness of factors that run far beyond data points that can be plotted are critically important to the evaluation and choices that are made. And then finally, it needs to live. It's got to be in an ongoing management space. The chart notes that it weaves institutional engagement and information together. It really does. And importantly, it supports the health of your accreditation process so that it's not as much of a drill every several years when it comes to that. So let's talk about this. We get asked a lot, well, where do you even start? We had a process that didn't go well. We have something that's a lot more ad hoc. How do we think about it? Well, where you start is where you start. So you've got to get going first and foremost. And the first thing we recommend is start and stop first with understanding what your organization's assumptions are around program evaluation. Because sometimes some people think it's just an internal assessment of health or looks at statistics, DFW rates, graduation rates, and other things. Others may have a different perspective. But most importantly, it does surround the fact that programs have life cycles. Institutions, community colleges, universities, everybody is great at adding new programs. Not everybody is so great in taking a look at things that maybe have lived past their life cycle and their application. And they don't meet the needs of your students any longer, and they don't meet the needs of your community. So if the organization is prepared to recognize that dynamic, it makes the process much more healthy. And then that means that you will be able to better identify where each of your programs stand. Are they something that is sustainable because they're strong and meeting your needs? Are they something that need to be fixed, perhaps adjustment in curriculum or even adjustment in focus? Is a program something that should be grown, that it's doing well, it could do better, and it deserves additional investment by the institution? Or possibly, is it at the end of its life cycle and could be sunsetted? Now, you can do it once. Doing it systematically is what really creates a strength in an institution. And most importantly, it's not something to be done in a closed type process. This is about something that should be very transparent, which means engaging your governance structure as well as your faculty and all of the other functions that I mentioned earlier. And then finally, one key thing, assumptions need to be put on the table. If they stay in each individual's head, or each stakeholder's head, it's not helpful to the group because you don't know what is going on. And it is with those assumptions that the information that's being consumed the data that's being consumed and the dialogue that is being engaged in is bounced against. So making assumptions explicit is usually very helpful. Next thing you want to do is you want to confirm your strategy. A lot of institutions since the pandemic have been reaffirming or re-engaging in strategic planning, but not everyone has. And it's important to make sure that your strategy is still on point for what you think it is, or have you drifted from what it is? Everyday operations being what they are, that's an easy thing to have occur. So check that out. And then decide what is important for your institution. Given your strategy and your mission, grounded in that, what are your priorities? The ability to identify those will help guide the framework under which you evaluate the program vitality for programs you currently offer, as well as the ones that you want to consider offering. And then what market are you? If you were here where I am in Phoenix, this is a very vibrant educational market. We have a lot of institutions, public sector, private sector, not-for-profit, for-profit, fully online, fully on campus. What's going on in your market? What are the needs that are happening? And what are the means through which prospective students and even current students can access education and their resources? And that leads into what enrollment pools you want to think about. What are the greatest interests to your school? There's a lot of emerging interest now in adult learners for degree purposes, as well as for certificates and other things. Is that an enrollment pool you want to add and pursue in greater depth, and consider your programs in terms of how they address it? And by the way, not just the academic content, but how you offer the programs. Are you making all your resources available only during the day? You're trying to reach a working adult. That is not true for most community colleges whatsoever. You have a very clear understanding of that learning population. But still, it's always best to check. Finally, are you positioned to compete? Are you offering things where they're needed? And can your students find them? And then making sure you're very clear about what is mission critical for your institution and protecting and preserving it for. And then lastly, think about your portfolio health. Understanding it is really important, and looking at it from a strategic standpoint, if you have both market as well as margin data, would be excellent. This is just a representation. I'm not going to walk you through this, but it's a way to plot your program based on market attractiveness scores. The size of the bubbles would be based on completions. You could make them enrollment. And what you want to understand is if your biggest programs are in attractive market spaces here versus not, or if you possibly have some risk if things are not trending the way you would want it to be. You could also plot your program margins in the same way. But really getting a sense strategically about what the portfolio looks like is helpful. So then let's talk about how you approach the process. The 3 preceding sessions we've offered have really dealt in the data space, market data, economic data, and labor data. We believe, as I said, about data-informed decision-making. It is the jump point for the dialogue and the decision-making. But to do it and do it well does require that it's not a single person that does it and interprets it, does the evaluation and presents it. People and the full team do need to engage. So start with your constituencies and being transparent. It's a lot more than just the numbers. I've listed here the people that you would want to consider to engage and in the full process as well as sub-processes. But it's important to keep in mind, you want all elements of the institution here because each has a different perspective and every one of them is additive to the knowledge pool as you consider your programs. And then you want to have a framework for analysis. We've talked to you about ours, which deals with student demand, employment, competition, and then degree fit being appropriate for the subject under consideration. Think about the framework you want to create within your institution. Put that data inside it so it can be thought about in an integrated basis. And then it gives you a baseline that you can then begin to take a look at comparisons. And then finally, not finally, but then really important, have a clear process for how you want to start initial as well as contain and retain ongoing management. We use a workshop process. It's noted here. It starts with data input. It does engage all of those stakeholders as identified earlier. And it really is designed to support this discussion about facts as well as taking a look at the judgment elements that are so key to honest, informed, and aligned decisions, which is the other piece. You really do want alignment. It's not helpful to reach decisions that half the group feels or device that you really need to have alignment, because those choices are going to be what guide investment in the institution, support for the health of the other institution, the whole institution. And then understand it's just actually the start. It positions you for the next steps. It's not the stop. And that means then you would need to have further evaluation, possibly, completing or blowing out a broader process for consideration. But nonetheless, ultimately, this is circular, not linear, the way it looks here. Once you start this, you can walk through the data. This is a complex deal. It's a scorecard. If you joined us earlier, you would have seen one of these. This is the organization of the market data related to a particular programming. And I'm not going to ask you to zoom in on it, but it gives you an at-a-glance ability to understand the market health of the program. You could have something similar for the economic health, and then later I'll show you a scorecard that pulls in the academic side of it, which is so critical. But nonetheless, find the framework that works for you and then use it, because it is where you can find your opportunities and spark ideas. So that's interesting, I'm sure. And I am talking to you about my experience and our experience at Gray with a multitude of institutions. It doesn't create any kind of a substitute for being on the ground and what it's really like to be in the process when you are a leader of that institution. So I'd like to turn it over now to Andy, and he's going to talk with you about what that is. Andy?
Great. Thank you, Mary. And as Mary said, good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are. Glad to be here today. My name is Andy Dorsey. I am the past president of Front Range Community College. I just finished 13 years as president. I actually was at the college for 29 years after starting as a part-time faculty member about 2 days before my first class started, but somehow I stuck it out and was able to be president for a long time and see the college through a number of changes. A little bit about Front Range. We're in Colorado, from the northern Denver suburbs up through Fort Collins to the Wyoming border. We encompass Boulder, Fort Collins, which both have a large R1 research institutions, as well as actually quite a bit of industry. Sometimes it's overlooked. There's tech industry, manufacturing, growing healthcare, IT. 27,000 students, almost 40 CT programs, plus a lot of sub-programs. And then Colorado has a unique guaranteed transfer process where a number of academic disciplines are guaranteed to be able to transfer 60 credits to any public institution in the state. And those are, in essence, programs in and of themselves and need program review as well, because some of those, each community college has to decide whether they're going to fully commit to offering those transfer programs. We've been lucky in that Colorado is one of those few areas where population has been growing for a number of years and generally has been economically robust. Although Colorado does not fund higher education very well, that growing population has given us a little cushion that not all community colleges enjoy right now. I'll go ahead to the next slide. Thanks, Mary. So here's a few lessons, but let me just say right up front, I have nowhere near all the answers. Program evaluation is one of the real challenges of community colleges, and it's an increasing challenge. I think many of us are in situations that are more challenging than they were 5-10 years ago. People in the country are starting to question the value of education. You're seeing declining population in many parts of the country. The pandemic didn't necessarily do good things for state budgets, and so some of us have faced declining external funding. It requires us to be more and more thoughtful about what programs we offer. And that challenges some of the culture of the institution, because our cultures are shaped by many years of assumptions about how we work. And in fact, I think one of the things Mary said, the assumptions about program evaluation, it's even broader. It's a question of assumptions about how do our institutions operate and what does the future look like for our institutions? And I think those are really important conversations. So a few things I'm going to talk about. One is about culture. Second is about how you introduce this and do some upfront work. Third is how you make a program evaluation a broader process too often I see it being, well, are we going to keep this program or kill it? And that often kills the program evaluation process. How do you position program evaluation in a world where the need for different kinds of program organization is becoming more and more apparent? And so program evaluation can be part of a process for looking differently at programs, but that means we've got to be thinking about how do we help people see the world creatively. And then finally, how do you incorporate new program development in an ongoing systematic basis? Sometimes I see institutions that have done a great job of systematically reviewing existing programs, but new program development is kind of ad hoc. And in some ways, new program development in a systematic way is more important even than ongoing program review in a systematic way. But I'll talk about that in just a second. And I see a question in the chat, so please feel free to put your questions in the chat. And if they make sense in the context of what I'm talking about, I'll just answer the question right then. And some of them I might leave and come back to as we move forward. So go ahead, Mary. So a few thoughts about culture. There's a famous quote, I think it's from Peter Drucker, although it's been attributed to a number of people, that culture eats strategy for lunch and for breakfast. And the idea is you can have all the strategic ideas in the world, but if they don't fit what the people in your organization think they should be doing, then the strategy is never going to work. And the same with program evaluation. You can have a great program evaluation system, but if people don't think that the program evaluation matches what they understand your organization trying to do, it will fail. People won't participate in it. They won't believe the results. So before you even get into program evaluation, and because program evaluation often leads to change and to hard decisions, you have to have the basic building blocks of trust. And that starts with, nothing profound here. It starts with transparency. It starts with explaining why you're making decisions as much as possible. If there's a word that I had for helping new academic leaders, it's why, and helping share the why as much as you can, even if people don't agree with the why. Being transparent with data and helping people understand the sources of data and believe in the data. And then as much as possible, listening to people's fears and responding authentically. And probably authenticity is something I should have put in the slide as well. Before you even have the conversations about program evaluation, as much as possible, you want to do this. Now, I'll talk about this in a second. Sometimes you don't have the time to do a lot of upfront work. You gotta jump in, and we'll talk about that in a second. Go ahead, Mary, please. So there's a famous quote by Mike Tyson. Everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face. And I think I've seen that with program evaluation, right? You have kind of this idea about how you're going to go about it. And it's fine as long as you don't have to be in tough decision-making processes where you have to close programs or substantially revise programs, lay off faculty. Once you get to those points, if your program evaluation isn't grounded in the culture of the institution and you haven't done a really good job explaining the why, then the process is probably going to blow up in some respects. A mentor of mine used to say, go slow to go fast. Spend as much time upfront engaging stakeholders in designing the evaluation process. And Mary talked about that a little bit, how important it is. And she had a list of all the people who could be engaged, and it's a daunting list. But on the other hand, the more that you have people engaged in the upfront process, the better. Now, you've all seen death by committee. You've all seen processes go into committees where they become incredibly complex, trying to please everybody in the committee. And that means you're going to need great leadership on who's ever helping put this process together that can actually keep the process simple enough. And that's not always easy to find. But talking about your values up front and why you're doing program evaluation, and even being frank about some of the potential outcomes is really important. One of the things that has become more and more of an issue at Front Range, and I think in many community colleges, is re-examining our values. And last couple of summers ago, we participated in an institute with the Aspen, or a seminar with the Aspen Institute about the importance of living wages and how you can get good wage data on your programs. And that's become more and more of a conversation at our college about what is a living wage in our communities and what's our obligation to focus on programs with living wages. Obviously, if we focus just on that, we'd have to look at every early childhood education program in the country. We might not want to close all those. Community needs matter, equity matters. Having those value conversations up front is really critical. Developing data trust is also critical because back to that point of when you get punched in the face, plans go out the window, trust in the data goes out the window too. That's a first thing people start to question, unless you've really done the work up front to say, okay, here's where we get our data. What are your concerns about it? What are your questions about it? How can we validate it? And then I'd say up front, a conversation about why would you close a program and when might you need to close a program? It's hard to have those conversations. Sometimes you want to avoid those because people don't want to have them. It makes people nervous. But if you're going to have a program evaluation process, people are going to be worried about program closure anyway. So you might as well have the conversation up close. And you won't know because situations change. You're going to have to be honest about that you can't predict what will happen in 3 or 4 years. But at least having the conversation about what would be a situation, at least hypothetically, I think is an important place to start. Please go ahead, Mary. KISS principles apply. More than anything, when I started looking at program evaluation processes, I saw many of them, and we even had them in our institution several years ago, that were just complex and bureaucratic. Faculty had to fill out endless narratives. They went to a dean. The dean didn't know what really to do with them. And then all the narratives said, we need more resources, of course, because every program actually really needed more resources. And there wasn't a good way of making them, the way that we had them structured just meant that they were going to die an unhappy death. So keeping the program evaluation process simple, maybe with simple metrics to start with, and then finding ways that they can lead to conversations, but not requiring faculty to do endless kind of write-ups, I think is really critical to making the process work. There's no easy answer of balancing exactly where you become too complex and bureaucratic, but I think remembering that more program evaluation processes have died by being too bureaucratic than have been unsustained because they were too simple is probably an important metric.
Andy, we do have one question, if you don't mind.
Okay.
Do you have any suggestions on how you can present this to faculty? Any actual words or messaging that you could use?
So I think that's a great question. A few years ago, there's a book by a gentleman who used to be the president of University of Northern Colorado called Prioritizing Academic Programs. And we had a conversation in our leadership team about that concept of prioritizing programs. And that went over like a lead balloon. I think faculty thought, we don't want to be prioritized. We want you to love all of our children in some respects and be consider all of the things we do important, which I think is a fair concern. So I learned right away that whole notion of program prioritization is a tough one because everybody wants to have the sense that if we're going to have the program in the institution, it's important. So I wouldn't go down that route. I think there's a honest conversation about the limited resources that community colleges have, the importance of putting those resources in the place that will best serve our community, and how the community college mission matches the kinds of programs we engage in. And that really our mission is to do the best job of supporting students and supporting the communities, which means we need to put our resources in the kinds of programs that will produce the most graduates who can meet the most community needs. We recognize at the same point that we are diverse institutions that have wide missions, and we're trying to meet a lot of different needs, and that it's always a balancing act, and we'll do the best we can to sustain the programs we have, but sometimes it's clear that they're not meeting the needs of the community. I think you just have that conversation up front. Maybe you talk about instances in the past where you've had to make hard decisions, why you've had to make them. And then I think one of the things you can do is really ask faculty, what's their view of this? When do you think you should potentially close a program, and have those conversations up front. You know, both the good and bad thing about working in community colleges is you have a lot of really smart people there, and a lot of them have thought a lot about this, and I think if given the right form, are willing to have those conversations. But there's no way that those are always going to be easy conversations, and they scare people, and they particularly scare people in the programs that are small. I don't know if that answered your question. Happy to think more about that if that didn't get to what you were thinking about.
Thank you, Andy.
Go ahead to the next slide, please, Mary. So this is one of the places where I really think program evaluation systems go to die. And that is if faculty perceive it as program evaluation is just about whether you're going to close my program. Because at that point, then everything becomes about, well, let's not have a program evaluation system so that, you know, my program isn't at risk, or let's do everything to make sure that the evaluation system doesn't point toward my program closing. And that's too, let me rephrase that. It's easy for that to become a mindset. I don't want to paint faculty with a broad brush. Many of them understand the situation, and many of them understand that there are hard choices to be made. But if they only think that the process is going to lead to their program chugging along as is or being killed, it's not going to be very interesting for them to engage in it in a meaningful way. And as community colleges change, there are opportunities to rethink programs. More and more, I think we have process to think about programs. We have the opportunity to think about programs being more condensed, maybe breaking the semester barrier, becoming a 20-week program or a 25-week program in a condensed format rather than 2 semesters, becoming hybrid, moving online. So part of what can happen in a I think the best program evaluation processes is real honest conversations about how a program might change. Perhaps even the name of the program needs to change, or the format of the program. So how does a program evaluation process help you have those hard conversations? Next slide, please.
And
So
I thought we had somebody who raised their hand.
Oh, yes. So it looks like Mr. Bucknell, or I don't know, Ms. or Mr. Bucknell raised their hand, it looks like. I don't know if you can.
Feel free to unmute Mr. McNeil and ask your question.
I did not have a question.
Oh, okay.
If you do have a question, please feel free to speak up. So I kind of jumped the gun on this slide, but I think that more and more program evaluation processes need to lead to conversations about how we could do programs differently. One of the things I have seen again and again is that the first impulse of most people when they see a program flagging is to market it better. And my conclusion after looking at a lot of programs over the years is that product actually matters a lot more than promotion, and that marketing is usually not the first avenue to take. The first avenue is to think about what's the product we're actually offering to people. That's not easy to convince many folks in an institution about, because it's easy to think about, hey, marketing department, get out there and market my program better. But what I've noticed is that the programs that are well designed actually typically don't need a lot of marketing, and that we often pour marketing dollars into programs that could really use some rethinking. And that's a conversation I've been trying to have more and more with individuals about, okay, if the program's not working, let's think about how we can look at the program. Those are hard conversations to have. And a lot of it depends on the professional development you do with your staff to help them understand creative ways to look at programs differently, and ways that programs may have adapted in other colleges to be more successful. Next slide, please. I think when you think about program evaluation, supporting your deans and chairs and thinking about how you're going to support them through this process is really critical. Program evaluation takes knowledge, stamina, and in many cases, courage. You need to have candid conversations, which means you really need professional development for the folks in your organization about how to do this process. Now, you can have a great process, but if you don't have deans and chairs that feel comfortable with the process and know how to make it meaningful, the process is going to die. And part of that professional development is helping them see the changing landscape, talking about what's happening in demographics, talking about what's happening in program strategy, where programs are being creative and changing, and how your business strategy may be changing along the way. And then support and engagement from top leaders in recognizing that when deans and chairs are having these conversations, it's emotionally draining. They might need some support along the way. Because even the process of implementing program evaluation often involves people being a little bit scared along the way. And having candid conversations, it also means that you have to have top leaders who are really willing to see program evaluation in a creative context. Next slide, please. And then, as I mentioned earlier, systematic approach to new programs is equally important to reviewing existing programs. I do think Mary was right in her comment that we're much better at starting new programs than we are at reviewing and closing programs. But I would also say, in my experience, a lot of new program development is haphazard. A community member or a dean has an idea, they bring it forward. If they have a lot of excitement around it, they have some community members, maybe some funding that's a grant, we go for it. And we don't always systematically look at the markets for the new programs, systematically look at the economics. That's one of the things that I think Front Range got a lot better at, was really systematically setting up templates for new program economics and systematically saying, what do we want for data to show the workforce demand? It can't just be, hey, I grabbed one piece of data, it looks good, let's go forward. One of the questions earlier on was, what does your organization struggle with? Oh, that was your question, Mary Ann, to everybody. Okay, got it, never mind, that wasn't a question for me. One of the things about the gray approach that I've really appreciated is doing a systematic look at the market for new programs on a regular basis and starting to have that guide how the institution is looking at new programs, rather than only doing sort of environmental scans by who shows up at a Chamber of Commerce meeting or what you're hearing from your advisory boards. Those are important. You need to do the kind of work on the ground, talking to people, but you also need the systematic review of data. And that's one of the ways that I found the gray data to be particularly helpful, because it organizes the possible types of programs for you. And then you can make decisions about, okay, are we going to investigate this one or not? And who's going to investigate it? One of the things I found in the past is that, for example, if you didn't have somebody who knew about HVAC, you might not be particularly sensitive to what's happening in the HVAC market. Well, when we did our analysis, we found out there was tremendous possibility in HVAC, but we didn't really have anybody who was excited about it. We had a dean maybe who was excited about healthcare, a dean who was excited about IT. Without that systematic review of the data, you don't necessarily find the kinds of opportunities that maybe you don't have people internally that would naturally look for. I will say that one of the things we also had to work through, besides just the standard template for economic forecast, is, and this is true not only for new program analysis, but for existing programs, is really talking through how you evaluate program economics. We did this internally. We didn't necessarily use Gray's system, but I think Gray's system is actually a pretty awesome option for you, especially we actually had a budget director who was really good at this, but not everybody has that. Refining your economics of programs is absolutely critical. And for years, we weren't doing a very good job, both with new programs and existing programs, in understanding, well, what kind of indirect costs do they have to account for? How do we really do sensitivity analysis for enrollment projections? Because everybody over projects enrollments, and how do we kind of make decisions around what's really a realistic, and then what's our downside? And how do we agree on what programs we're willing to support that lose money? Finally, I think with both new and existing programs, this has become especially true for new programs. What are the living wage standards? We know that we're keeping early childhood education because that meets the community needs, but are we going to start a new program that doesn't provide a living wage? I think that will evolve at Front Range, but as I left, we were more and more of the mindset that we probably wouldn't start a program that didn't provide a living wage, because that became incredibly important. I think that's the end of my slide. Is there one more?
No, that's it. But
Okay.
maybe any final comments on this as a critical takeaway for everyone?
Well, you can do program evaluation in lots of ways. We used Gray first for doing a systematic scan of new programs because we hadn't done enough of the groundwork to really have the conversation about a systematic scan of existing programs. We got into the process of actually developing a program evaluation system. It got a little bit hampered by the pandemic. It's still being rolled out now. And the pandemic, I think, for us really interrupted that ability to sort of have those critical conversations, some of which I think had to happen in person. I just couldn't imagine having some of those critical conversations over Zoom, although we probably could have. And we had the luxury of being able to move relatively slowly. Some institutions don't have that luxury. A colleague of mine has been in an institution where when he institutional economics, he didn't have the luxury of moving slowly. He had to make the case quickly and move quickly. And what I would say is one of the things that's guided me in a lot of these kind of change management actions is John Cotter's change management model, the 8 steps for change management. It's far from perfect, but his basic ideas about really clearly making the case for change, both what's the crisis, what's the need for change, but what's the positive, also the positive vision for change, and then how you communicate that, I think are really powerful. And so as you go into this, that might be a good guide for you as thinking about implementing program evaluation, because his idea of change management, I think, fits the idea of bringing program evaluation in an institution very well, and fits with some of the kind of themes that I've laid out before.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Incredibly valuable insights and perspective. So moving forward, once you start, we talked about this, Andy emphasized it, and I think I'd like to emphasize it again, that doing it consistently is key to sustaining vitality. And there are a lot of ways you can do it, and there are different time intervals related to different areas that you would want to consider. So, for example, depending upon your structure, quarterly or on a semester basis, you want to take a look at your starts, your retention levels, your course completion rates, if you have any gateway issues at all, and if you do student surveys, that feedback. On an annual basis, take a look at your student outcomes and your margins if you have that data, as well as your student, faculty, and staff ratios to see if you're balanced and your resource where you need to be. Then on a biannual basis, looking at curriculum and the resources that support the institution and longitudinal outcomes based on what's important. I know now for many community colleges around the country, this has gotten more complex because in addition to certificates and associate degrees, permissions are being given to offer bachelor's programs. And that's a different kind of thought process. It's a different kind of program selection process. It changes the universe in which you're considering offering the program and who is offering it as well for you. So it would be something that you would want to consider as you evaluate your portfolio. You might be running a slightly consistent but different cycle. And then the inputs to each of these. We believe pretty strongly in program report cards, and I'm going to talk in a moment about tools to use. Those really are designed so you can take a look at how your program is matching against your mission, where it's stacking up in terms of academic performance against your standards, how the market health is looking at it, as well as your economics. Tools, not just process. Having accessible tools is very important. Andy referenced deans and chairs. Having them accessible across the institution is very important. Some data you would obviously want to be thoughtful about where you provide that accessibility. Others might be more broad. This happens to be an extract from a management dashboard that we have created for our clients. Their market data, their program data can feed in. It is a way to organize your information. The key measures that you see are important to track for your programs. It's designed to deliver information, actionable data type information. That's rather critical. Just as a brief overview of what this program happens to be, it happens to be an associate's program in accounting for a transfer on the transfer path. There's a quick at a glance, how does it look? Are your markets in the green? Where are they? You can see here from that 5 that happens to be in this section right here. This program is pretty much on target for all, maybe not quite as strong in its margins, which is why it's in yellow. And then here are the at a glance stats for the current data from the market, and where it's looking for student demand, how it's strong, whether or not employment is strong as well. And then finally, margin data about revenue, if there's state appropriations monies that are flowing in, what the discount levels are looking like for students enrolled in this program, et cetera. You can see your net revenue and your costs, as well as what its contribution is. Right now, these are represented in terms of total dollars as well as student credit hours, which sometimes can be very important for equalizing between programs. The center portion of the report card that we provide to clients is actually designed for the client, in this case, the institution, your institution, to complete, to make the decisions about what roles are important for the program and where the status is, so that when this actually does come into program review, it's current, right? There's not an enormous amount of work to get this done to meet a deadline because it's been updated by the people responsible for managing the program. And it does provide you the ability to outline the academic fit, the focus, how it matches against mission, who are the students that are served by the programs, the learning outcome goals are here. It's an excellent way to support accreditation applications as well and reviews because you have the data here. And I'm going to touch on this other section to the right in just a moment. But getting the data organized so it can be used is very key. Getting it so that it can be accessible is critical for you as you want to use and deliver a transparent live process. Done well, these dashboards can help support evaluation and accreditation and continuity because changes do happen, right, with programs and with leadership. And so having it is in one spot is a great place. This is the right-hand side of the dashboard. It's blown up here. These are metrics that can help you understand what your enrollment for the program has been over particular time periods and what your completions are looking like, your demographic breakdown for the program, as well as the academics related to it. What the profile is in terms of number of students, what hours are being taught, what's being taught by full-time, tenure track, adjuncts, et cetera, your student progress, DFW rates, and completions, median time to complete, which becomes important. If you have benchmark exams or licensure, what your pass rates are, and then if you're capturing anything from your students in terms of surveys. Again, everyone can design whatever dashboard is useful for their institution, whatever data is relevant, but having it in a repository where people can access it, write to it, update it, feeds a really integrated, vibrant type process itself. So with that, just very briefly in summary, these are the things that we want you to take away from this dialogue in relationship to both the management and the support as you're considering leadership in a program portfolio space for your institution. Think about your markets and think about your economics if you can pull that data. And to Andy's point, think about your sizing, your growth, your competition, your opportunities, new and current. I can't say how often I hear about programs that people are satisfied with. They don't think about growing them because they're meeting expectations, so they're good. The truth of the matter is you may already have the best success, already active in your portfolio. Growing something you're doing well in that has more market potential is way easier than launching something new. much less costly and much less risky. So you really want to think about both sides of this. New opportunities, so you can stay current programs, and where you have strength. Be sure and identify what's important for you.
Hey, Mary, can I throw something in?
Absolutely.
You know, you had this slide earlier on with the quadrants where you had programs in different kinds of situations, some that were, you know, potential to grow, some that were stable, some that were shrinking. And, you know, it's interesting. For most people in community colleges, that's not a comfortable mindset to be looking at that chart because, you know, that's a very business approach, but it's really helpful. And actually, I found that a number of our folks related to that, and it helps really thinking about where are the places we have a potential to grow. Because I would agree with you 100%. That's a blind spot for many of us, especially from a leadership perspective. We kind of rely on the faculty to make their own judgments about their individual programs, but they're often so focused on being able to meet the needs of the current students that they might not have the time or the ability to have that broader point of view. So that overall look at your program portfolio can really help get to the point where you're talking about identifying some programs you could grow.
Thanks, Andy. Understanding what's important for the institution, critical. And I think Andy elaborated on that clearly. Making sure it's distinguished and spoken, not assumed, is absolutely important in that process. And then actually how you think about using data is the difference between it becoming relevant and trustworthy or just something that's there and maybe not as important. And the key to that is you have to turn it into relevant information. So data for data's purposes, just to have it, is not useful at all. It needs to be relevant. So when you're thinking about what you're capturing or what you would like to have, it's key to identify the areas that are of greatest importance. Oftentimes for community colleges with its mission in the community, the responsibility for making sure you're preparing students for work, if that's the direction they're headed, means labor market data can be particularly important as you're considering your programs. If so, you want it to be correct, you want it to be robust, and you want it to be representative of the geographies that you serve, not just generally data. So keep that in mind, because when you think about the tools that you have and the data that's represented on it, it needs to be that relevant information. And then finally, implement a repeatable process. So this is where perfect is absolutely the enemy of good, right? You can make it so amazingly detailed, no one will ever want to do it a second time, ever. It will become impossible to update, and you will have invested a lot of time, effort, energy, intellectual capital in something that will just absolutely fail. So instead, think about what your whole institution feels it needs, engage them, and then design it from there. Make it possible first. You can always improve. So that was everything we wanted to share with you all today. I don't know if we have any remaining questions or anything else that we could cover. And I think if not, Marianne, I believe we have.
Yeah, does if anyone has any remaining questions, I see one question here in the Q&A, and it's simply a thank you. So thank you as well for joining us.
So I think we have one other poll because we would like feedback from you. And I'm not sure if you can launch that now or not.
Actually, if you don't mind, I wouldn't mind opening up the room and just asking anyone to raise their hand if they found that this presentation, this session today was helpful, and if they'd like to see continuing sessions like this in the future. And I see we have a number of raised hands, so thank you very, very much. I appreciate that. If there are no further questions, I'm going to say that we are happy to have that you have joined us today. I really appreciate it. Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Andy, and for all of the great questions. And we hope to see you soon.